It is my great pleasure to introduce to all of you and to welcome onto the stage our keynote for this morning, Saankalaxt, did I get it close? Ernestine Hayes. She belongs to the Gutch-Hit Wolf House of the Kagwantan clan of the Tlingit Nation. Born and raised in Juneau, she's the 2016 to 2018 Alaska Writer Laureate. She teaches at the University of Alaska Southeast, those lucky guys. Hayes is best known for American Book Award winner Blonde Indian, an Alaska Native memoir, which is also receiving an Honoring Alaska Indigenous Literature Award, and was a finalist for the Kiriyama Prize and the PEN Penn Nonfiction Award. Hayes' latest book, The Tao of Raven, which I personally feel should be required reading for everyone. I absolutely love that book. Places fiction and nonfiction narratives in the context of Raven and the Box of Daylight and Sun Tzu's Art of War. Hayes belongs to the Kagwantan clan of the Eagle side of the Tlingit Nation. Grandmother of 4 and great-grandmother of 3, Hayes makes her home in Juneau, not far from the Juneau Indian village where she was raised. Please join me in welcoming Ernestine to the stage.
First, thank you to the Occoquan people for allowing us to stand on this beautiful land and for allowing my family to live for 7 counted generations here in this beautiful place, Gunalchish. Thanks also to the First Alaskans Institute for their important social work and the work towards social justice in Alaska. Your influence extends far beyond one place and will impact generations far beyond our present time. Gunalchish. It's customary to introduce oneself and to make clear one's lineage before beginning to speak, but with your permission, I offer my introduction later in this talk. It's also common practice to declare that I do not intend my words to offend and to ask your forgiveness in that eventuality. While I don't expect that to occur, nevertheless, I trust that it evinces the care with which I have attempted to craft my words to say, please forgive me if my words offend you. It is not my intention to do so. Before I address the opportunities embedded in the concept of our united struggle towards social justice, I make 2 points that it is my practice to offer whenever the occasion presents itself. To those of you who have heard these points before, please indulge me. And further, please continue to contemplate these truths and share them even when it seems repetitive, unwelcome, or uncomfortable to do so. In fact, share these truths especially when it seems repetitive, unwelcome, or uncomfortable to do so. Gunalchish. First, almost every source describes the long record of native use and occupation that took place before European contact as prehistory. Indigenous groups, however, possess histories of thousands of years of occupancy and exodus, relocation and settlement, exploration and discovery, embedded throughout the generations in legal process, artistic declarations, symbolic regalia, and oral tradition, at least as accurately and in many cases more accurately than the European system of writing that has been used for so many years to remove rights and appropriate lands. We must always remember that before colonial contact, Native cultures possessed vigorous legal systems, effective educational systems, efficient health systems, elaborate social orders, elegant philosophical and intellectual insight, sophisticated kinship systems, complex languages, profitable trade systems, every social institution needed for a culture to flourish for thousands of years. Second, we do well to remind ourselves that had the colonial invasion not taken place, Indigenous people would still be living in the 21st century. Our lives would still be modern. Paved roads, airports, and electricity would still occur. Some things would be different. We would all be speaking our own language. Our children would be receiving educations meant to lead to their success. We would not be so vulnerable to incarceration, alcoholism, poverty, abuse. We would be healthy. I was born in the territory of Alaska at the end of the Second World War. For the first several years of my life, I lived with my grandmother in the Juneau Indian Village while my mother was in and out of the hospital for tuberculosis. After a few years, my mother came home to stay, missing half a lung. When I was 15 years old, my mother and I moved to California, where I stayed for 25 long years. I never came home, not once, but not a day went by that I didn't long for home. Finally, when I turned 40, my life in shambles, not for the first time. Broke, not for the first time. Homeless, not for the first time. My children either grown or living with their father. I said to myself, let me go home or let me die with my thoughts facing north. It took me 8 months to get from San Francisco to Ketchikan, living in my car, sleeping in shelters, standing in food lines. When I arrived in Ketchikan on Mother's Day in 1986, I camped out from that May to October, standing in the Salvation Army food line 5 days a week and fishing off the city docks on weekends. And then I found a job, found a place to stay, sent for my mother, sent for my sons, and 2 years later we made it all the way back home to Juneau. And I know I love it more than if I'd never left. Thank you. One of my first jobs after I came home to Juneau was at a native theater where we told old stories and sang and drummed old songs. At the end of each performance, we stood in a line on stage and introduced ourselves in our native language and then translated what we had just said. I would say, Llingik Einach Saankalaxt Hayes. My Tlingit name is Saankalaxt. Dleidka Einach Ernestine Hayes. My white man name is Ernestine Hayes. Chak na ayakhat. I am eagle. Kagwan tanayakhat. I am of the Burnt House People clan. Guchhit ayakhat. I belong to the Wolf House. Ganach Tedi Dachhan Hatsiti. I am a grandchild of the Ganach Tedi. Shitka Kwan. My clan springs from Sitka. The woman standing next to me would step forward and say, Llingit Einach Kastin Yuchatu Sakwa Chukane Diayakhat. I am of the people from the grassy place, and I belong to Glacier Bay. And I love to hear her say that, for it describes our relationship to the land. Who this land belongs to, or if land can even be owned, is a question for politicians and philosophers. But we all belong to the land. We all belong to this place. My grandmother was always a tough old woman ready for any challenge. Even after my mother and I left Alaska, Even after we heard the unwelcome news of her death, even after I sat for hours with her memory, recreating the years she fed me soup and told me stories and washed my clothes, she was only the imposing gray-haired woman who taught me I was eagle, told me bears were my cousins, reminded me that the wind was my grandfather. She often declared that our family carried powerful names, but I never saw in her the youthful bearing that comes with the noble birth she claimed. Some time ago, a Raven relative gave me a photograph I'd never seen. My young grandmother poses with confidence, dressed in the latest white man ruffles, shoes, hair, and jewelry slick, modern, rich. Behind her, an embroidered cloth brushes against the polished arm of the leather chair on which she rests her hands. Behind her could have been a flowered dish awaiting her dignified touch. She always favored decorated platters. Before her was a long path lined with tumult and sorrow. But in that moment, she must have thought that her station in the world she was entering would be equal to the one she was leaving. She must have thought that she would meet every new challenge. She must have thought she was entering a world where high-born Tlingit women were respected, where ruffles danced like chilkat fringe, where sunflowers bloomed in dark rainforest gardens. It's an interesting exercise to wonder what our world would be like had it not been for the colonial onslaught that so profoundly changed our generations. Those events that placed this portion of our story into motion, those events that call us now to work towards social justice. But is there something else to wonder? Something we have all been taught to believe is unthinkable? As with the 2 points that open my talk, I beg your indulgence if this is something that you have already heard before. What would we do if in the year 2020, only a couple years from now, this American culture was suddenly subdued by another culture that believed theirs was a superior way of living? Their God was the one true God, their language the only worthwhile speech, their history the only one that mattered. What would happen if this young American society, less than 250 years old, suddenly was rocked by cultural trauma? It's unthinkable, but let's suspend our disbelief for a moment to consider what would happen to our grandchildren's children if in the span of the next 50 or 60 years a killing blow was delivered to the way of life we now know. What would happen? What would we do? We could no longer speak the English language. Schools, businesses, stores, everything would be conducted in some new language we didn't understand. Our laws would be swept away. No more regulations, acts of Congress, municipal codes, no more executive tweets. No more laws as we now know them. No more doctrine of European discovery. No more American manifest destiny. Everything would be done according to some new legal system that we didn't understand and that was created and enforced in someone else's favor under a doctrine brought with them from some faraway place, a doctrine that conferred upon themselves the right, the power, the authority, the privilege to take what they pleased, to subdue, to dominate, to enslave, to teach. Our religions would be abolished. Bible studies and communion and concepts like American exceptionalism would be seen as prehistory, evil. There would be no more "in God we trust" on our money. In fact, there would be no more money. The new currency would be in the hands of others. Our bank accounts, our property, our belongings would suddenly be of no value to us, and most of our remaining wealth would be taken. Our standards of beauty would be ridiculed. Our art would be trivialized. Our literature would become folklore and superstition. Our philosophers and great thinkers would be described as unsophisticated, quaint storytellers. All of our place names would be changed. Our own names would be changed. We would be forced to celebrate peculiar holidays. We would be taught the exploits of someone else's heroes. Our children would be taken from us and sent far away, where they would be forced to forget English, forced to dress in someone else's fashion, and forced to learn trades that prepared them for servitude. Taken from our influence, they would be given unpronounceable new names in a foreign language. They would not learn the history of their country, and they would receive the strong message that whatever they did, they would never be as good as those who were members of the newly dominant culture. Before long, no one would be learning English as a first language. Before long, our legal and educational and spiritual and social systems and beliefs would disappear. The day-to-day lives of your grandchildren's children would be characterized by unequal rates of incarceration, unequal rates of educational dropout, unequal rates of parental termination, unequal rates of suicide, addiction, poverty, depression, anger, shame, and all the other inevitable effects of cultural trauma. There would be no lack of reports and meetings and task forces and training devoted to addressing the problems of their failed assimilation. Unthinkable. A man by the name of Daniel Quinn is the author of Ishmael, The Story of Beyond Civilization, and many other books dealing with the Western form of society that has taken over our world. His words are quoted in uncountable sources, including one called Community Research Connections for Sustainable Community Development, which explains one of Quinn's most important concepts, that of totalitarian agriculture, which is defined as a destructive practice that subordinates all other life forms to the relentless, single-minded production of human food. In a paper published on their website, the assertion is made that totalitarian agriculture has never been fully and completely practiced in human society except by one culture, the Western capitalist society that has become the national and indeed the global standard. Quinn's book, which is paraphrased in this paper, explains that in totalitarian agriculture, food is not only fenced off to prohibit others from accessing it, but every species of animal, bird, or insect that persists in trying to forage in those fields are intentionally destroyed. Unsurprisingly, then, as this paper goes on to describe, a totalitarian form of agriculture produces food surpluses, resulting in agricultural domination that is used as a justification for territorial expansion, that in its turn justifies wars of domination and the destruction and enslavement of other cultures for the sake of expanding aggressive agricultural practices. To further this domination, other cultures are made to appear primitive, a term deliberately crafted and perpetuated in order to advance the Western culture's claim that indigenous people and people of color do not deserve the land from which they and their cultures emerge because they do not historically fence off food to prevent others from its access, and do not destroy the natural order by killing every other life form meant to coexist in the garden that comprises our natural world. This community research paper observes that the expansion of Western culture has continued unabated for nearly 10,000 years. As a result, totalitarian agriculture has invaded every single facet of our lives, of our history, and of our understanding of those terms. We are reminded that the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution, and the industrial revolution were manifestations of aggressive agriculture. In fact, we see that obsession with fencing off food to produce crops for profit in our very own Alaska history of establishing farms and colonies where hunting and gathering once supported healthy indigenous populations. As colonial practice, tribal cultures that resist the concept of manifest destiny are converted or eliminated. And so we have come to this pass. In Western culture, the rich are rewarded for exploiting the poor. The powerful are rewarded for exploiting the weak. And totalitarian agriculture is the norm, not only for the crops this country grows, but as a symbol of Western culture itself. A defined characteristic of the practice termed industrial agriculture is that it is the dominant food production system in the United States, a fact agreed on by virtually every common source. This sort of food production requires heavy use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. It practices the destruction of all other forms of life, and it normalizes isolation of our food. Perhaps there are parallels to the Western culture that gave rise to these unnatural practices. Perhaps imbalance, destruction, and isolation for the sake of profit are characteristics that reach beyond the industrial farmer's fields. Perhaps totalitarian agriculture is a metaphor for this Western society. Perhaps it is a cancer that seeks to kill every form of life that threatens its dominant position. Some years ago, I was a mentor for the low residency MFA program at the University of Alaska at Anchorage. Each year, every mentor and faculty offered a reading and talk at the annual week-long residency. One year, one of the other mentors was an author by the name of Craig Childs. He read a passage from his book, Apocalyptic Planet, that tells about a walk he took with a friend through a 600-acre cornfield in Iowa. 600 acres that were once tall grass prairie. 600 acres is about a square mile. As Childs describes in his reading, that's a big area when it's made up of row after row of identical corn stalks, all of them the same height, all of them at the same stage of growth, all of them an exact number of inches from one another, all of them seemingly isolated from other forms of life. No other life forms to be seen on or around them. Is that another metaphor for the dominant culture that has created the imbalance, destruction, and isolation of the culture we find ourselves in today? Childs describes his discovery of a tiny mushroom growing near a cornstalk. He remembers his thought at the sight of the tiny mushroom survivor. He says, "What else lived here? I lifted up the leaves, scanning the undersides near the stalks, and after several tries, I disturbed a small cobweb spider with a pearl of an abdomen hanging from its thimble-sized web. I caught it sucking juice from a captured crane fly. It quickly retreated into the seam of the leaf, which I lowered, giving the spider back its meal. Childs tells the reader, these fields are managed for maximum yield, and anything but corn or soybeans in their plots is considered rogue and either destroyed or prevented from growing. There were originally 300 species of plants in the tall grass, 60 mammals, and 300 birds. Kinds of insects numbered over 1,000. Craig Child says that nosing along the ground, he found one busy red mite, the size of a dust mote, hurrying across barren earth, up and over shredded pieces of old corncob. It felt like another planet entirely, he says, a bizarre world of little nomads at the base of monumental corn stalks. There was an ant, too. It was so small, it couldn't be pinned to a specimen board. Craig tells us that industrial agriculture miniaturizes species, allowing in only that which is very small or uniquely adapted. He tells about an early afternoon when they walked into an agricultural drainage, a swath carved from the middle of the field. Pheasant hunters call those things sloughs, gaps in the corn where you can get a shot off rather than in the tangle of standing corn. It was a dry river of waist-deep grass winding north to the south, the first open breath under the sky. Among nodding foxtail, clouds of grasshoppers sprang ahead, hundreds of them clicking to the air. The open sky was strange, prismatic, as if sunlight were passing through white glass. There were no bees, but I did see a delta-winged katydid, he says, clutched to a grass stem and a black stink beetle trundling along the ground. The vast majority of living, moving things were grasshoppers, and they were everywhere in this open passage. Craig said he'd never seen so many, as if this were their refuge. Childs leads us to a refuge unexpectedly discovered in the middle of totalitarian agriculture. In an industrial cornfield doused with chemical fertilizers and pesticides, where most other forms of life are attacked or destroyed, a field that is made inhospitable, isolated, unbalanced, unnatural, what shall we be? Shall we be a tiny mushroom survivor? Shall we be a red mite, an ant? Shall we find a refuge and become grasshoppers? Shall we aspire to be a cobweb spider with a pearl of an abdomen hanging from its thimble-sized web? My grandmother's name was Saudu, Ruth Willard Hayes. She chopped wood for the cook stove and washed clothes with a scrub board. She rolled a scarf around her head, picked up a knife, and went to work sliming fish. After putting me to sleep, she bathed herself, and the next day she powdered her face while I watched. She drew eyebrows atop brilliant, knowing eyes and reminded me from my first day, be prepared. Don't let anything surprise you. You must be willing to face every threat. For the first few years of my life, I lived with Saudu while my mother was in the hospital. During those years, my grandmother taught me how to see the world. She taught me how to listen to the spiders in our house, for they knew things that I should know. During summers, I sat on the hill behind our old house and waited for her to call me in for soup or send me on a chore. Spring was not much different from winter. In winter, I listened for the Taku wind and hoped for a sled to ride down frozen Capitol Avenue. Inside the house, I stayed away from the snow that drifted under the door into the dark hall. I sat in the kitchen and with my grandmother waited for my grandfather to come home. We both wondered what mood he would bring with him through the door, with the drifted snow, with the wind, with a wide smile carrying gifts, or with a cold grip on a cheap bottle of something to help him forget. Winter in Llingit Oni brings magpies and ravens. Eagles allow themselves to be more freely seen. We take measure of the wood, we sweep the stove, we unpack blankets from their summer store. We watch the mountains and the birds for marks of early snow. We wait. Unlike spring, winter does not bring more signs of spiders into the house. Like the bears, they must be holing up somewhere, or dying, or dead. My grandmother instructed me about spiders. Don't hurt them, she warned. Learn from them. Watch them. Learn. Spiders hunt. Although we might consider them bashful around humans, they show no such timid spirit with their prey. Even the web spinners remain at the ready, testing their woven silk for the struggles of unwary victims. Though their size is small, their nature persuades us to boldness. Spiders greet the world early. They wake and get busy early in the day and early in the spring. While the more familiar admonition for those who would lead a correct life is to wake before the ravens, rising before the spiders behooves us even more. The industry of spiders exemplifies right living. In the garden, spiders occasionally mimic the colors of nearby blooms. Their sly lurking reminds us that boldness and industry will suffer from an absence of cunning. When still a newly married young woman, my grandmother traveled to Klukwan to visit her dying sister and retrieve the youngest child, a fresh-born girl named Kahkwe. With the child, my grandmother and her new husband, Ernie, traveled back to Juneau. In 2 or 3 years, my grandmother's first natural child was born. She eventually gave birth to 3 boys and 2 girls. 1 baby boy died, and she and Ernie began to drink. Spiders are persistent. One sleepy morning, years after I had begun teaching my own grandchildren about spiders, as I waited for warm water from the faucet in the hand sink, I glimpsed a spider whirling down the drain. I washed my hands at another sink and told myself there was nothing I could have done. I promised myself and the spider that from now on I would more carefully attend to the presence of other lives. Normally, I trap spiders in a clean glass jar, blocking their escape with stiff paper forced at the feet of their panic, and release them onto the wet ground outside the front door. I send them all away with my good wishes. Now, I mourned my role in one spider's death. I imagined its headlong rush into the dark, churning void. But what could I have done? I asked myself in hopes of absolution. My grandmother's words held no room for pardon. I could have been precise. I could have watched. I could have been mindful. Hours later, I braved the hand basin again, just in time to witness that spider summiting the drain's final climb. Without a moment for rest, she began again her labor to overcome the sink's smooth walls. While I retrieved a sparkled glass and picked through recent cardboard, I thanked her for the lesson. She had reminded me to persevere. My grown son does not share my consideration of spiders. He smashes them if he thinks I'm not looking. Otherwise, he calls for me or my granddaughter to trap them. He hasn't the patience to listen for the stories they tell. My grandmother's oldest child, the baby girl she'd retrieved from Klukwan, grew into a good worker. She worked at the city cafe and in the hospital. She got pregnant. She remained unmarried and gave birth to a baby girl. My grandmother disapproved, but the grown daughter did a lot of work around the house and paid a lot of the bills and bought a lot of the groceries, so my grandmother could only yell, scold, and wait for my grandfather to come home either drunk or sober. her. The grown daughter got tuberculosis and was sent to the hospital. My grandmother fit the new baby into her life. Spiders exhibit qualities to which I can only aspire: patience, determination, common sense. I don't know what my grandmother must have meant for me to learn when she taught me not to disturb spiders I discovered crawling along our wall or scurrying into corners. I know now that by teaching me to respect this one small creature's life, she taught me reverence for every living thing. By cautioning me to listen to spiders, she taught me to listen to the world. I don't flatter myself that my own grandchildren pay any more attention to my admonitions than I did to my own grandmother's lectures at the time. But I do believe that one day they will remember me as I remember her, teaching me in a voice of scolding grandmotherly love, ready to dance with me, ready to answer any question, ready to watch with silent wisdom while I listen for the whispers of others. After the oldest daughter came home from the hospital, after all the children were grown or dead, after everyone had finally moved out and my grandmother found herself alone in the old house, she and her new man rented an apartment closer to town and drank most of the time. He often raised his hand to her. She wrapped herself in a knee-length coat and covered her face. When a young girl ran into the ground floor apartment to visit her grandmother, he held back his raised arm and turned away. She shapes her web. She drops herself with utmost faith into the abyss. She and her sisters hang themselves from the ceiling here and there. They focus themselves against the light. I sweep the hint of their shadows from my cheek. I come across them on the walls and find them crawling in slippery circles in the tub, unmindful of the coming flood. I retrieve a sparkled empty glass and pick through recent papers for stiff board. She senses me and tries to flee, but where can we run when we're trapped by porcelain walls? When her oldest daughter, the one she had retrieved from Cluckwan, the one who didn't know she was her mother's natural child, she was not her mother's natural child until one thoughtless moment when the knowledge was thrown at her across a room, across a fracture, across a broken life, left the state vowing never to return. My grandmother carried on with the rest of her life until one cold day in the midst of a Taku wind, when she walked south on South Franklin Street instead of in the northern direction that would have led her quickly home. 2 weeks later, her oldest daughter forced her eyes to read the unwanted words in the unwelcome letter from a younger sister telling her of her mother's lonely death. Found on the ground in the cold winter, found wrapped in a knee-length coat, found alone. She shapes her web, spinning one line, drops herself into the unknown, is swept unmindfully from unseeing faces, finds the smooth destination, slips repeatedly from smooth, unforgiving walls, is flooded into the dark, clinging by desperation alone against the circle's side. When at last the flood ends, she climbs toward the light, only to be caught beneath the transparent glass and forced upon the cardboard, is carried into the cold, is dropped without ceremony onto the pebbles, the clover, the dirt. She overcomes every danger. She allows nothing to surprise her. As my grandmother always knew, we must be like the spider from our first day to our last. We must be willing to face every threat. From Ben and Jerry's to Harvard, people, companies, corporations, universities, social justice organizations, and too many others to count have begun to lift arms in solidarity. Perceptions of justice may differ, but it's not difficult to recognize that we live in a culture founded on genocide and made wealthy by slavery. We can see the social inequities produced by a belief in manifest destiny. We cannot argue with the realities of the society in which we live. We can, however, ask ourselves a question to help us see even more clearly. If we set out to build a racist society, what would it look like? What would a society built on racism look like? Let's think about that question. Discrimination and marginalization would be key features in a racist society. People of the dominant class would rarely witness or even be aware of lives that are lived on the margins. And when they saw discrimination, they would not easily recognize the phenomenon so common to people who do live their lives on the margin. An example is poverty. In the United States, people of color experience poverty at a rate approximately double that of the average for people of the dominant class. Forced to work more hours for less pay, people of color have less time to devote to their families, less time for education, less time to struggle out of poverty. Unemployment rates for people in poverty approximately double that of the dominant class. Poor people have to work 2 or 3 jobs to afford the rent that drifts up to the pockets of the already rich. That's how the system works. Poverty would be a key feature in a racist society. How about education? What would the characteristics of an educational experience be in a racist society? It's no secret that large gaps remain when we compare high school and college dropout statistics. Educational inequities is evident in the scarce number of minority teachers, judges, lawyers, doctors, and other professionals when compared to that of the dominant social class. This circumstance perpetuates inequity and results in the image of authority figures who do not reflect the population. This imbalance of authority would be a key feature in a racist society. It's easy to think that in Alaska, health care is not unequal. We all know that Indigenous people can go to Search or Mount Edgecombe, the Alaska Native Health Consortium. But who would not trade that so-called free health care for equitable statistics with regard to diabetes, alcoholism, depression, prenatal care, newborn complications such as low birth weight, and issues associated with such characteristics as domestic abuse and suicide? A disparity in health problems and services would be a key feature in a racist society. Wealth disparities are a key feature of a racist society. White families own a disproportionate share of the national wealth. Studies have estimated that for every $100 white families earn in income, families of color earn approximately $60 or $70. That phenomenon is not accidental. It was built into the system we live in right now. In the system we live in right now, children of color are more likely to be identified as troubled, more likely to be suspended, more likely to be referred to law enforcement, more likely to be irrevocably placed into the school to prison pipeline. This phenomenon is not accidental. It was built into the system we live in now. It's not a surprise, then, that in our criminal justice system, people of color are overrepresented in courts and in prisons. Some have noted that the slavery upon which this country built so much of its wealth changed to Jim Crow and then to mass incarceration. When we look at the statistics, it's clear that incarceration rates are built into the system we live in right now. Racism is systemic. Colonialism is an act of cultural violence that pursues and perpetuates subjugation as its primary goal. A society built on a belief in manifest destiny, a society that allows schooling to perpetuate the image of primitive others, a society that tells itself that anyone can succeed if they just work hard enough, a society that tolerates Black men being shot in the street, Black children being shot in the streets. A society that tolerates the impact of that subjugation, imposing arbitrary constraints on meaningful indigenous values that were developed over hundreds of generations, replacing successful systems of education developed over those many generations, erasing accurate methods of history keeping, of beneficial health systems, of vigorous trade practice, all those social institutions that had allowed a sophisticated, healthy, vibrant culture to flourish for thousands of years. That subjugation, that colonial impact has carried out its intended purpose. It has resulted in disproportionate rates of Alaska Native high school and college dropouts, disproportionate rates of Alaska Native poverty, disproportionate rates of Alaska Native substance abuse, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, self-abuse, suicide, just as colonialism is intended to do. A racist society that was built long ago but continues its work perpetuates that inequity. We are here to decide what steps we can take to cure those evils. Our basic human understanding, a natural part of our human awareness, one that humans have been socially trained to deny in this culture, is that everything around us is alive. Everything possesses life and is full of life, full of spirit, full of energy. We are part of a life-possessing world. We are part of a life-possessing garden. Earlier I asked this question. In an industrial cornfield doused with chemical fertilizers and pesticides where most other forms of life are attacked or destroyed, a field made inhospitable, isolated, unbalanced, and unnatural, what shall we choose to be? We might decide that we are that tiny mushroom survivor, a trailblazer in an environment in which we are not meant to thrive. Or shall we be a red mite or an ant, representing our larger community, making ours a productive life so those others who watch us will follow? Shall we build a refuge and become grasshoppers in such large numbers that someone will say they have never seen so many of us before? Shall the slough we build be so inviting, so open, so honest, so right, that others are drawn to the equitable place that we have built? Shall we be a spider, persistent and determined? Shall we spin our lines, drop ourselves into the unknown, even when swept away by those who don't acknowledge us? Shall we slip ourselves again and again away from those smooth, unforgiving porcelain walls? When we are flooded into the dark, when we cling by desperation alone, when at last we find strength to resist the flood, shall we be the ones who climb toward the light? When we are carried into the cold and dropped without ceremony, shall we be the ones who overcome every danger? Yes, we will allow nothing to surprise us. We are willing to face every threat. We are here to join hands and work toward an equitable shared future. We are here to build my grandmother's garden. Let's get started. Refuge.
Oh my goodness. Ooh. You took us on a journey. Oh, man. Isn't she incredible? Wasn't that incredible? For so clearly, powerfully, unapologetically explaining our experience. That was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. You know, in our work at First Alaskans, we have an opportunity to travel all over the state, doing all kinds of really amazing work on behalf of our people. And over the last few years, we've spent quite a bit of time working in the realm of education and working with educators, administrators, and looking at ways to transform the education system to better serve not just Native kids, but all kids. And part of the uphill climb in that work is to help people to understand that our education system is not neutral and unbiased. To help educators to understand that we are living within a white, Western, patriarchal system that has a very clear agenda, right? And it's not neutral, especially not for our Native kids and kids of color. And one of the ways that we help educators to encounter that understanding is through a quote from your book, Tao of Raven. I share often the quote, and I'll read it so that I don't get any word wrong. After all, Indian education isn't designed to teach Native children to be white. Indian education is designed to teach Native children to want to be white. And we ask educators, in what ways is that different now? Right? We're not talking just the boarding school era. We're talking about the education that our kids are subjected to right now. And that awakening is an important part of being part of the transformation. So, Kunoshish, Kloyanakbak, for using your gifts to help all of us. I'd like to invite to the stage Lagunai, Akachlak, and Kunmagu. We wanted to, share a little bit about ourselves with all of you so you could get to know us a little bit, so you could know the spirit and the love that we put into this kind of convening, this kind of work that we do with our communities all over the state. And to do that, you've heard from a few of us our brief introduction, but we wanted to share with you a little bit of the heart, the real introduction, a little bit of our heart. So I'm actually going to ask Lagunai to kick us off, and it'll just give you an opportunity to know a little bit about where we come from. Yeah, to set the tone.
Ganeshish, how Koyanakpak. How many of you were at the event last night? Just show of hands. Many of you were at the event last night. So many of you heard my story about the fact that I'm trying to learn my languages. So I'll share that with you one-on-one later, but I just want to make sure to do this the best that I can. I'm learning, so if I make any mistakes, I apologize for that. Kadala is good people. Nun kwaigai git kianans hinu dinan kiagan. Nun kwaigai git kianans was my grandmother Mona Jackson from Haida Gwaii. Gonna hake hinu di chan kiagan. Gonna hake was my grandfather Tommy Jackson Sr. from Kwan. My grandfather was Tsagwedi killer whale. And he was a Tlingit. Stathkawas Hinudi Aukiang. Stathkawas is my mother, Delachini. She's here, she's a weaver. She made this unbelievable hotness that I'm wearing around my neck. I know you all want one. Bilchini Hinu di Chankiang. Bilchini is my father. He's from Cake, lives in Cake. Lagunai Hinu Khadkil Dikiang. Lagunai is my Haida name. Lagunai. 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 You can call me Lagunai. Or you can call me Liz. It's like profoundly different, right? It's like Lagunai, and it's like Liz. Gatsakas gustu di kwalagan. I am eagle. Chichkitne ude ijang. I'm a Chichkitne woman, and our crest is the hummingbird. And I want to recognize my relatives that are in the room and tell you how much I love you, and it's so good to see you. Katsas yuchat duasauk. Katsas is my Tlingit name. Yech nachatsati. I am of the Raven people. Kach adi ayachat. I am Kach adi, fresh watermark sockeye salmon is our crest. Tsagwedi Dutch Khan ayachat. I am the grandchild of the Tsagwedi, the killer whale people. Kikwan ayachat. I am from Kikwan, the mouth of the Don people. Yesterday I talked about, the meaning of our language and the words and what they actually center us around, and how geographically specific they are, or how socially specific they are. And for our people in Kikwan, we were known for the length and duration of our ku'ich, our parties that we would have. And that is one of the things that we continue to carry to this day, is this understanding that we are the village that never sleeps. And yesterday I talked a little bit about learning Nuchtmut from Agatha Banachkak, where the wind pushes down so hard that it holds the village against the cliff. And that's how specific and geographically intelligent that our languages are. And we are the ones responsible for continuing that knowledge. Without our languages, we have lost not just one worldview, but here in Alaska, 20 knowledge systems, 20 knowledge systems. So for us, it's not just a journey of recovering who we are individually. That is a worthy journey. It is a worthy journey to try to make yourself whole. But that, as an Indigenous person, is only the fingernail of the journey that we're actually on. Because our journey is a collective healing. And if we're not in it to win it, then what are we doing here? If your head wasn't on fire today with what President Peterson said, what Ernestine shared, then what are we doing here? Who has time to waste? No one has time to waste because we are all so committed to the work that we're doing together. That's what this Social Justice Doers is about. How many of you were just like, oh yeah, I can go, no problem. I have lots of time on my calendar. I'll just go right down there. Right? All of us were like, oh, one more amazing thing I gotta make room for. How is this gonna be possible? I got all these things to do, and yet you made room. You made room because there's something on fire inside. You are doing something. You are committed to something that brought you here. And we want to say, thank you so much for that fire that you brought into this room, because this room is hot. It's the new hotness. So while you're here with us, we're going to tap the expertise that you have. We're going to share the framework of how we kind of pull people together, but really, it's y'all that set the agenda. We asked for people to put in proposals of ideas that they wanted to share with people. So these workshops, this is all from you. These ideas, these things that must be talked about, they came from you. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to come together and be together and do this work together. And as we do it, I also wanted to share on behalf of First Alaskans Institute, our board of trustees and our staff. Alaska is a native place. Always has been, right? When we do this work as Indigenous people, sometimes people who aren't Indigenous might feel like they're being left out, like they're not being cared for, like they're not being addressed, their issues are not being put forward. But as First Alaskans, we're here to tell you that we're for all of you. LGBTQ, family and friends, Black, Asian, Latina, Latino. What is it? Latinx? Is that the hip new phrase? Latinx? All the people who bring all of their different abilities. Our new Alaskans, our newest, freshest, the freshest that just came here. Because it is not the work of Indigenous people to subjugate others. That's not our work. And we're not going to accept that work. We know what that work is about, and that work is not ours. But what is ours is our homelands. And it does not matter what layer of government you might paint it with, put on top of it, try to push everything else down. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, for over 10,000 years we've been here, and no matter what happens in this country, we're still going to be here. All that we ask is love. If you are not Indigenous to Alaska, we want you to love Alaska. And to love Alaska means you love Indigenous people. And the people who are here who are not Indigenous, you're here because you love us already. Yay! Could feel it. We could feel it. We could feel the desire to want to do something together. And that's what this is about. It's about linking arms. One of the things that we've been working on for the past few years is there's been this continued struggle to just be visible, right? Whether you're Black or Hispanic or Pacific Islander or Alaska Native or a woman, or you have different abilities, you know, there's just a struggle to just be visible. And in that struggle, we're so pushing up against these hard things that sometimes we don't have the opportunity to just kind of step back and relax and breathe and look around and see all of our relatives. And part of what this is about is getting a chance to meet our relatives, to link arms and put ourselves to work together. Because by the year 2040 in Alaska, the people of color, the quote-unquote minority population in Alaska, will be the majority. By the year 2040, we will be the majority in Alaska. And right now we have the opportunity to have some foresight about what that means. Are we just gonna replicate the same old patterns, the same old systems, just with a bunch of brown people in it? Is that what we want? No. But that change doesn't come easy. It requires us to actually know each other, love each other, show up for each other. And y'all showed up for us today. So Ganesh Chish Hawa. We're going to try to make sure that you have opportunity to meet with each other and connect. And that's part of all of our jobs together, is that we're going to make the effort to become the woven fabric that's going to support that 2040 vision. And you know, there's a lot of people in here. There's about just under 200 people in the room. So you have a mission. And your mission is to meet all of them. We'll mix you around, don't worry. Give you that chance. But on behalf of all of us, Ganesh Chish Hawa, thank you for being here and for setting forward our path, because this is the work that you all put in front of us. Ganesh Chish. And then you guys can.
I realized this morning when I did my introduction that it really wasn't a full introduction, so I'm glad that you said that this morning, that this is our full one, our real one. So I will greet you again. Uvlami, it's a new day. Good morning. Koyanakpak Kaigivsi for coming here today. As I said earlier, Atira Kunmuru. My Inibak name is Kunmuru. 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 It's on my name tag. I love this movement of us learning each other's names, so don't be afraid to come ask me if you want to practice it later. I'm also practicing other people's names. So no fear, no shame. Let's do this. But I'm Kunmuru. My family is Muriel Hobson on my mother's side. Grandparents are Ben Hobson Sr. and Jeanette Hobson, Hassan Jani and Palavan Khan on my father's side. I was reflecting on just how amazing it is to be here with you all today. And as I was listening to Liz and reflecting on the theme that we chose for today and for tomorrow, partners for the next 10,000 years, I couldn't help but keep returning to the feeling I had yesterday at the warming of the hands, and how full of joy and full of emotion I felt in a good way. How despite all the heaviness that we've been carrying recently and for a long time, I couldn't help but remember and I closed my eyes, the beauty of how good it felt to see all of your faces yesterday and to just be with each other. I know someone shared that yesterday, and the instant they shared that, it was like a light bulb went off. I said, that's why I feel so good. We hadn't even started the program yet, and I was already feeling so cheerful, so happy. And I think that feeling that I have when I close my eyes is why I wanted to be here today. It's why I wanted to do this. It's why I'm so glad that we're all here, because when I close my eyes and I know that feeling, and I know many of us who were there yesterday felt it too, that's the power of when we come together That's the power of all of us in one space, and we didn't do that. You did that. We did that collectively. And so when I think of that feeling, that's that feeling that drives me to be here, that drives me to want to show up. We know where we're at right now. Ernestine put it very, very powerfully. She held a mirror up to our world and the world we live in, and we have a choice. And I think everyone here has made their choice. And yesterday, I felt the power of that. And so I just wanted to say Gunashtish Koyanakbak for letting me be there to experience that. It was as my first day ever in Juneau yesterday. I don't think I could have ever picked a better day. You all set the bar really high. So Koyanakbak for being here. I'm really, really looking forward to rolling up our sleeves over the next few days, putting our heads together, loving each other up, and just getting ready for the next few months, few years, step by step, 10,000 years. We need a strategic plan from 0 to next 10,000 years by the end of the summit. Okay. Devra.
All right, yeah. Huinga Gatlago, I introduced myself earlier this morning. I just wanted to call back into this space the sentiment that I shared yesterday, that this is a summit for the doers. And so if you arrived here and you were a little bit tired, so are we. Damn it. Because we're the doers, right? This day and tomorrow, it's about holding you up. It's about connecting all of us. It's about learning more about your social justice hustle, the movement that you show up for in your day-to-day. I don't know it yet, but I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn side by side with you. These 4 walls, Centennial, this space, it's our space. We rented the whole building. Because for doers, we knew we needed this time and space to be who we are. We thought afterwards, why didn't we print other signage to post over the Egan and the Hammond in the Miller room? So in your brain, just go ahead and decolonize and imagine the real place names on those doors. Someday we'll get there. Today might be that pathway.
We have Post-it. You could do it.
So this summit, we know it's never a convenient time, but we could feel through our travel across the state, across this country, the fatigue, the weight. And as individuals, it feels so heavy sometimes. I know I feel that way. It's too much. The system, right? That feeling of oppression, the many fires that we need to try to tend to. It feels heavy. But this summit was about bringing us together, so for 2 days, these 4 walls could just be us, a chance to breathe, new air. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. And so this summit is about holding each and every single one of you up, bringing voice to those things that you care so deeply about, sharing some of what we care about. Because in order for us to be here for another 10,000 years, some things are going to need to transform. And I don't just mean change, I mean transform. And so when I look at that beautiful map of Alaska, that heartbeat, that fist, that's the heartbeat of Alaska, right? And those of you from Interior, you know, you're always saying, we're the heartbeat of Alaska. When I travel with my daughter and we're flying down here to Juneau, we look out the window and I'll tell her, this is Tlingit country. I bring her to Fairbanks and I'll say, this is Athabascan country. I bring her home to Bethel. This is Yupik country. so that she knows the responsibility that we have, the connection that we have as First People, the respect when we land here that we have to carry for the First People. It's her kuleana, right? We gotta raise them up feeling that responsibility. And so for us, we have a kids' corner here in our back, and I'm glad there are kids here. We're family friendly, our kids need to be with us, right? We create a safe space for our families, our children. We want them with us. We want them hearing these things. We can't be hiding in hushed tones the importance of this movement, of this work. And that's why we're webcasting. Because as much as we all wish to be here, many of us can't. And so, hi to everybody on the morning webcast. We hope you're feeling our fire. We're glad you're with us. This is about the doers. And so when we put the chairs out, we lay the linen on the tables, we knew it was going to be a good day because you came. You responded. And this is about being good relatives. We want everyone to feel welcome. We want everyone to feel a part of this. So find your peace. What's your piece? We need every piece to fill out this transformative puzzle that we are filling. It's too much for me. It's too much for 4. It's too much for the 9 or 10 of us that make up our organization. And so in our work, we come to you. We come to your communities. We create space for the experts, for the geographic intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom to come forward. And that's what this is about. Oyana.
Well, what I was going to share completely shifted as I listened to my sisters. Kolyana for calling into the room our kids, our precious children. They really have so much to teach us. And if we're open to it, there's profound learning that can happen from them. I want to reflect to you a teaching that my daughter reminded me of that's connected to my own fire, that was a reminder that I needed. Some of you may know about 1.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And as I faced the treatment that was ahead of me, I knew that there needed to be something, strength, that awaited me on the other side of the journey that I knew was going to be really hard. So I told myself, when I am healthy and well again, I will mark my return to wellness in the traditional way with the tavlagun on my chin. And almost as soon as I had decided that I was going to mark my return to health and wellness again with my traditional chin tattoo, I made the decision that I was going to do it myself. So as I went through treatment, I would think about what it was going to look like. It was something to look forward to on the other side, because I knew I had to get to the other side. There's too much shit that needs to get done. I don't have time to die right now. There's a whole lot that still needs to change. So there was no other option than to get to the other side. So when I would think about what I wanted it to look like and what I wanted it to represent, it's very deeply personal. And from community to community, and in some cases family to family, the meanings are very different. So I had an opportunity to think about what it would mean to me. And as I was going through treatment, I was just reminded that our time here is so fleeting. And so I made the decision that what it was going to look like was 2 lines to represent our past ancestors and our future ancestors. And it was going to remind me that I only occupy the space between those who've gone before and those coming after. And every time I would think about it, it made me cry. It hurt. But that's why I was going to do it, because it really meant something and it really reminded me of something. So I had made that decision. When the day came, when I was prepared to do my tattoo with my sisters in a women's ceremony, I went and I picked up my children. I have 3 beautiful sons and a beautiful daughter. And I was driving them to my house and just, telling them, today's the day. We had talked about it. And my oldest son said, well, did you decide what it's going to look like? And I said, yep. I'm going to do 2 lines. And my second oldest son said, why 2 lines? You've been drawing 3 lines, because they've been seeing my sketches. And so I explained to them, as I was driving, I explained to them why, to remind me that we're only here for that short time, and we're the connection between our past and future. And my Panik, my daughter, 7 years old, she was in the back of the van, and she said, Mama, you can't do that. And I looked at her in the mirror, and her eyes were just shiny, and her lip was wobbling. She said, you can't do that. I said, why? What's wrong? She said, there has to be 3 lines. You're here. You have to be there. You're not invisible. Our children teach us so much. She reminded me in that moment of the profound purpose that every single one of us has. We are here for a purpose. Each of us have been given gifts that make our world a better place, and we have a responsibility to own those gifts and to use them to make our world a better place. So I offer my daughter's teaching to all of you. Each of us, every single one of us, are needed. We need your gifts. We need your love, your passion, your fire, your energy. It's going to take all of us. And we're so thankful to be here with all of you, doing this work together. Kaya nakpak.
So you can understand that it's pretty amazing to work with these people. And we get to do this work across our villages and across the state. And when we go into our communities, what we really try to do is set up a different way of engaging than we may have had an opportunity to do before, simply because there's been just so much. And it really matters putting intention and love into the way that we connect and the way that we talk to each other. We're all familiar with the way things are, with the amount of drama, with the amount of abrasiveness, with the amount of just tit for tat, with the amount of just vacuums of silence on things that matter. We're all familiar with that. And sometimes we don't show up in a good way because sometimes we're in a place of being hurt too. But in this place, we want to honor the ancestors that you brought with you. We want to honor the elders who raised you. We want to honor the parents and aunties and uncles who just spent so much time trying to lift you up, and your community lift you up, your family, your friends lift you up. And we want to bring all of that in here to this room and put it to work for us. And the way that we have done this at First Alaskans is we co-created with some of our racial equity, our Alaska Native Dialogues on Racial Equity hosts and visionary group members about 10 years ago or so, these agreements up here. And these are our Native values in action. These are operationalized principles on how we want to engage with one another. And so we're gonna share what these are. And as we're sharing it, I just want you to kind of consider, is this something that you can agree to uphold in our time together, okay? Our forefathers, yes, from our ancestors, our forefathers. So this is our way of thinking about, how do we actually put these values that we have, the value of showing love and care and respect for one another, the value of honoring our elders, the value of reciprocity, all of these big values, how do we actually operationalize it? And so that's what this is. So for us in this work, the first agreement is in every chair, a leader. If you're showing up to be of service to your community, that's what a leader is. A leader is a characteristic. It's a call to service and a response to it, right? Responsibility. You have the ability, and so you respond. And that's what it means to us. We don't care about your title. We don't care whether you were elected to office. We don't care how much you get paid or the job that you do. What we care about is, are you stepping forward to help others? That's what we mean by an every chair leader. So if you showed up to this gathering, you responded to a call, an invitation, and you came here. And we want to honor your leadership. So throughout this time, when you see things that need to be done, please just do them. Most of you already do that naturally. You see some litter on the ground, you pick it up, you throw it away. You see someone needs a tissue paper, you give it to them. You show up and you watch and you just jump right in. So we want to make sure that we call on that in you and say that there is room here for all of us to be leaders. And we welcome it.
Our next agreement is speak to be understood and listen to understand. And those words together, they might sound familiar, but what it's really calling on is for us to quiet all of the noise in our head, shut down the emails, and to really try to understand someone, especially if you don't agree. It's a chance to be curious. Why do you think that way? It's a chance to be engaged, especially when we don't agree. Oftentimes, we're waiting to respond. We kind of have our argument or our point, and we're kind of like prepared, or maybe we even cut people off. And that's the busyness of engagement. But when we're really speaking to be understood, we are realizing that the words we speak have power. They impact others. And so it's also a recognition that we may unintentionally be hurting someone. So be thoughtful. Social justice issues aren't easy to tackle. We didn't put a definition up here about what it means. We're going to do some group work later to co-create a definition, if we so choose. But if we came here with our plate already full, our agenda already set, we're gonna leave here feeling like we didn't gain anything. We often say we're sponges in this work. We have to let things off our chest in order to absorb the goodness of the day. So if you walked in here feeling like a solid brick, you already know everything, you're fully loaded, right? Then what are you going to learn from this experience? What are you going to share? What are you going to teach? How are you going to connect? That's only going to happen if we're speaking to be understood and we're listening to understand. That's where our spongeability comes in.
Our next agreement is to be present and be engaged, and I think Agatluk touched on many of those points in her. I love the phrase you just said, spongeability. We can't really be in this space together with each other in the best way possible, really absorbing everything and really appreciating each other and the fact that we have the joy and the gift of each other's presence at this particular time. If we allow ourselves to be overcome by all the other things that we have to figure out and that we have to do and that have to get done, and all the things, I love to make a to-do list. My coworkers will attest, my fam will attest, they've seen my lists, but this is not the time to pay attention to our lists. This is the time to be with each other and be present. And so we just ask that you come into the space with that intention, and let's do our best to kind of leave the nagging lists to the side for just this time.
Valuing our time together, I can promise that in a blink, we're going to be at the end of the day tomorrow. And it will have gone too fast, and we'll have more to say and more to feel, and we'll be filled up in ways that we didn't expect this early on a Monday. But to make the most out of our time, we have to make space to be able to learn from each other. There are a lot of amazing people here, and you come loaded with incredible experience and perspective. And we want to gain from all of you. But the only way we're going to do that is if we all agree to make space to listen to each other. Right? What's the saying? You can't learn when you're talking. Right? We want to learn from each other. We want to learn from each other's experience. Dr. Dennis Demmert, something that he said, I really loved it. And it's related to the Speak to Be Understood agreement as well. He said, when you approach someone that you disagree with in respect, that respect will be returned to you. And you can learn a lot about the issue by listening to their good thinking. Right? Regardless of how we feel about different issues, we have a lot that we can learn from each other, but that requires that we make space to listen to each other. So that's what this agreement is about.
Save space for meaningful conversation. Generally, we ask that we create a place where people can speak their truths, and we make a commitment that we won't write people's names down with quotes as we take notes so that they have a little bit of anonymity and space to share. We realize that this is a little bit of a different situation because we are live streaming and broadcasting. But when you're in the spaces where there isn't the live stream and the broadcast, just to know that that's something that we really want to honor and uphold, which is giving people the room that they need to say what they need to say. If you're sitting in a place, if you're having a conversation with someone and you feel like something in your gut and you hold back from saying it, that's the exact thing that you need to say. If there's something that you're holding back on and you're not giving breath to it, you're not giving life to it, it's just going to sit there inside of you like a stone. And we're not going to be able to bring your knowledge into a space so that we can actually do something, include it, learn from it, be informed by it, and use it for our betterment, even if it's something we disagree with. the fact that you shared it in allows all of us to collectively do something with it. And that's what safe space for meaningful conversation means. We're going to agree not to just get offended at each other. Yeah? We're going to agree to listen to each other differently and try to see past our initial feelings. Because as people who've been traumatized, as people who wear our emotions on the surface of our skin for completely righteous reasons, sometimes we can react with pain when we don't hear things easily, or it's abrasive to the way that we're thinking or feeling. So we're just going to ask that in this space we give each other grace to assume good intention, to listen, and then if it's still there and you're like, I don't know if I like what they said, I'm not really feeling that, then have the conversation. That's what safe space means. And we want to really put that into work with us, and it's a hard muscle to exercise, but we have to do it because that helps us kind of in our daily relationship hygiene, right? One of our brothers in this work, Jay Smooth, talks about changing the paradigm of race discourse from one of, I had my organ removed. My racist organ was removed in 1984. I couldn't possibly be racist anymore. To a race paradigm of, hey, you got a little bit of racism stuck in your teeth. That as a society of people, you wouldn't let me walk around like that, right? You would say, take care of that. You know? And that's how this should be. It should be both real and gentle and loving, but also like give people an option. So that's what we mean by safe space for meaningful conversation. And if any of us aren't creating that with you, come and talk to us, because we're trying to put the best love and intention into this space.
Our next agreement has challenges with an arrow towards solutions. And sure enough, we could spend a long time dwelling in that bucket of challenges, right? And once you start going down that path, sometimes it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We end up way down here and we're like, how are we ever gonna get back up, right? And then you leave the room or you leave the conference and you leave and you just feel worse than when you got there, right? We've all had that experience. Well, we're here to just call into the space the challenges because we can learn from them. But we are not here to dwell and to spiral down into the abyss. We are here to put the challenges on the table with a forward arrow on solutions. Because this savior complex hasn't proved to do us well, right? Somebody's not going to come and save us. Right? We are the ones we've been waiting for. We have solutions within us. We have knowledge. We have ancestors. And so as much as we need to be truthful and address the challenges, we're not going to dwell in that space. We're not going to hide behind them, but we're definitely not going down the abyss. And so when we put in the invitation, get ready to roll up your sleeves, this is what we meant. Take your jackets off, whatever you got to do to get to that place where you feel ready to put the solutions on the table. Cool?
I don't know about you, but sometimes we can get into this space of speaking only from one element of our experiences, speaking only from our role at work, speaking only from one element of who we are. And so this next agreement is, we ask you to take off your hat and bring the fullness of yourself into these next 2 days. I don't think we can really get to that space of thinking about solutions and tapping into our inner brilliance if we're only speaking from our role at work or our title at work or our identity as simply one-dimensional. We are complex human beings. We occupy many identities all at once, and they're all welcome in this space. And we not only hope, but we want you to bring the fullness of yourself into this space. Otherwise, we won't be able to get to that end point that we need to get to, that our future ancestors are calling us to get to. So this is just an ask to remember to take off your hat and welcome and invite the fullness of yourself into the space.
Related to that is not to put on other hats. So how many of you guys have heard I'm just going to play devil's advocate here for a minute. I want to call someone else's perspective into this space. To that, we say, the devil doesn't need your help. Right? Represent your own perspective, your own truth. We will honor it, and we'll work through a better understanding of the issue together. Right? So don't put other hats on while you're taking your hats off. Our value of humor helps us. We welcome that into our space. We know that when we can laugh together, we're growing our bonds with each other. And Lord knows, working in the realm of social justice can be absurd, right? Some of the things that we're faced with, some of the experiences that we have, I am so glad that we live in the age of memes. How many of you guys have social justice memes stuffed on your phone? I know I do. Thank goodness for it. And we say, with our community, if you're out in one of our villages and our people are being very formal with you, referring to you as Mr. or Ms., and very distant, that's a warning sign, right? But when we're teasing you, when we're giving you a hard time, when we're bringing our humor into the ways that we're interacting with each other, that's when you know that we're family. That's what we want to bring into our space.
We are responsible for our experience, and this one is phrased very specifically. It does not say, you are responsible for your experience. It says, we are responsible for our experience, because we are collective-oriented peoples as Native peoples, and for us to think about oneself as the primary, as the penultimate, as being the individual, and it's the individual's rights that should supersede everybody else's, that doesn't translate in our languages. What does translate is that this is our space. This is what we are doing together. So if you as a person have to check out to go deal with something so that you can maintain the health and well-being of your family, we get that. But know that when we're here together and we are working together, it is our time. So what you put into it, what you decide to put into it, will help everyone else have an incredible experience. And what you withhold from it will also impact everybody else's experience. So we really want to just say, let's honor this time that we have together. We will not have another time like this. This is a gift. And we really want to honor that. So we are responsible for our experience.
And then finally, we say take care of yourself and take care of each other. Right? Who else starts a meeting that way? We need to be well. We're on a healing path, right? Last night was so healing. Could barely sleep, just thinking about so many things. But I had to close my eyes and just for a second check in with myself. I had to take care of myself before I could come up here on the stage behind this backdrop. Can't take care of myself alone though, right? Sisters, family, community, Alaskans, we gotta be taking care of each other, looking out for each other. And that's the spirit of today. That's the spirit of social justice doers. Someone having a hard time, check in with them. Offer to take them to coffee on Wednesday, right? Just because this conference over doesn't mean the bonds that are created need to end. So part of taking care of each other, continue that conversation that I know we're probably gonna have to cut off due to time. If you're really getting into something at your table, pick it back up on Friday. That's what we mean, taking care of each other.
I wanted to share a quote that I've been carrying around with me for a little while. And it kind of goes to this: take care of yourself, take care of each other, and along with all the other ones. And it is, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted in a profoundly sick society. The normal that we have been told is unhealthy. We have to define what normal means. It's our responsibility to reset that definition when we're taking care of one another, to know that, you know what, there's lots of stuff going on and we have all kinds of baggage, right? We have all kinds of baggage, our communities, our cultures, everything that's been just with a foot on the neck. No wonder that we have these things. And anybody who's not on fire because of this stuff, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted, right? So what are we gonna do about it? We're gonna take care of each other. That's what we're gonna do about it. We're gonna reset the way that we engage. That's what we're gonna do about it. So we wanna ask all of you, you guys cool with these agreements? Can we use these together over the next 2 days? Oh my gosh, look at this. Can you do that again in slow motion? Oh. So these agreements are the pen. Angela, where's Angela? It's your scroll. It's like your 10,000-year scroll. How precious is that? Ooh. And our operating truths are on the back. Yeah, that is hilarious and precious. Don't leave home without it. So if we can all agree to uphold these agreements in the way that we're talking, what that means is essentially check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? Take care of one another. And if you have any questions, if you're curious about something or you have questions about something, please come and talk to us as the hosts. You have a schedule of things, right, that lists out what we're gonna do. But what we really want you to do is pay attention to our hosts. Our hosts are gonna be moving and shaping the flow as we go along. So it's in the book so that you have an idea of what's coming, but we may adjust because part of the work that we do is listening kind of to the pulse of what's happening. So sometimes we're gonna shift it a little bit. So we want you to know what's coming, but also trust the host to know how to get us there or how to change things around as needed to accommodate the group's needs, okay? So if everyone's cool with that, we're gonna move right into everything. So again, on behalf of First Alaskans Institute, our board of trustees and our staff, Ganesh Chishawa for all of you being here.